How healthy is the IT service provider channel? Are providers less dependent on vendors? What's going on with AI and what might come next year? Carolyn April of CompTIA joins me today for a freewheeling conversation as we dive into what might be coming based on the current state of the channel. Welcome to the Business of Tech Lounge, the live version of the Business of Tech podcast. It's Wednesday, October 2nd, 2024. And I'm Dave Sobel. We'll take questions and comments throughout the show, so make sure to put them in chat. If you have a question, we'll happily respond to it. I want to thank Sales Builder, our Patreon sponsor, whose support makes this show possible. Focus on your IT sales workflow with the power of automation and visit them at salesbuilder.com. That's BUILDR.com. And a reminder, I am watching that chat and we'll keep an eye out for your questions and comments. Well, Carolyn April is the Vice President of Industry Analysis at CompTIA, where she leads research and reports on key trends affecting the IT channel and broader tech industry. With over 2 decades of experience, she provides strategic insights into channel dynamics, workforce trends, and the evolving role of technology solutions providers. Carolyn, welcome to the show.
Hey, so good to be here. So good to see you too, Dave.
I am so excited to have you here to have this conversation. Now, there's some fascinating data in your State of the Channel report. You highlighted in particular a surprising statistic that 36% of MSPs don't fully trust that vendors won't go directly to their customers. And I will say, I thought that seemed like a lot. Layer on top of that, the fact that IT providers are enrolling in fewer programs. You saw the greatest growth in the category of firms enrolled in just 1 to 4 programs, and the percentage of channel firms involved in no vendor programs increased from 7% to 11% in a year. Now, I might argue that vendors are becoming less relevant. What's your take on this data set?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? It was probably the biggest change, if not a head scratcher, from previous years of doing this study. And you could interpret it multiple ways. You could say vendors are less relevant, or there's something a little bit more nuanced, I think, going on here. I think working with a zillion vendors is far less relevant today. I think that what we are finding in our data, and anecdotally as well, so I talk to a lot of solution providers, as you do, I'm sure, and MSPs and people out there, is that what many of them are finding is having a line card filled with 20 different vendors or more, even 10 or more in some instances, isn't manageable. It isn't manageable, and the ROI on it is simply not there. There is much more to be gained these days by participating in fewer programs with vendors whom you would consider aligned with your goals, aligned with your business outcomes, and invested in you as an MSP or solution provider, much more so than you serving as a sales arm for their organization. And a lot of this might seem very obvious, and it's a kind of a shock to me that that hasn't been the case all along. But I think what we're seeing in this era of so many vendors out there to choose from, we've moved away. I'll backpedal a little bit. We moved away from the days when you had 2 or 3 major hardware vendors and 2 or 3 major software players, and you were a reseller in the channel, and you kind of like made your bets on which one you were going to be. I'm going to be an HP hardware reseller, and I'm going to be a Microsoft software reseller, and I'm going to have that on my business cards, and all of my marketing material is going to be about my allegiance to these programs. Well, today's day and age with the cloud and all of the SaaS players out there, the multitude of cybersecurity players, there's a plethora of vendors to choose from. And I think it's caused a little bit of chaos on the minds of solution providers and MSPs. The choice is overwhelming. And so you could, and I think what we saw is for a while there were a lot of folks in the channel choosing a lot of vendors. They were like, well, we'll sign up for, this many cybersecurity vendors and this many marketing automation vendors, and you name CRM vendors, you name the software vendor. And it got overwhelming. These are small companies often. They don't have anyone dedicated to managing the partner program and incentives and rebates and all of the things that they need to look for in these programs. And they weren't getting as much out of it. They found themselves, I'm really only selling maybe 5 vendors here on a regular basis. They're bringing me a lot of money or making me significant margin. Why don't I double or triple down on them? I think that's the reality check that we've seen this year, is that many MSPs and other solution providers out there are realizing we don't need that many vendors. We need the ones that mean a lot to us and are going to help us make money.
Now it's interesting you say it that way, because I'm trying to understand. Need might be doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence, right? So I want to actually think this through a little bit, because my understanding is particularly in a world of cloud, and in particularly SaaS, like in a world of SaaS, for a lot of small businesses, you actually have more pieces of software. Not necessarily saying vendors specifically, but you have a lot of SaaS software that a small to mid-sized organization is using. Is what's happening here, that the supplier, i.e. the MSP, who's supporting that, is it essentially that they've just said, we're only going to go in to work with a smaller group and just kind of make availability of the other ones, like just make sure that the services are available and these are the ones that we're going to focus on? Or do you think it's just, are they actually trying to eliminate the number of things in their end customers?
I think it comes down to the commitment that they make to a particular partner program. So it's not that an MSP or a solution provider won't sell a particular SaaS application or product, but they may not be enrolled formally in that program. They're not going to go and invest the resources that they need to be in whatever tier that is considered, a good tier to be in a particular vendor's program. The other thing that's in play here is that there are quite a few distributors today who are doing tons of aggregation of a lot of these SaaS applications, so that the vendor themselves is kind of abstracted from the MSP and solution providers out there. They're not actually working with those vendors directly. They're working through the distributor level or the marketplace level of aggregated solutions. And they don't necessarily, and because they do it that way, they're not necessarily mandated to join a program formally with any of those vendors who happen to be in that bundle. So I think it's really a matter of disengaging from being so formally enrolled. And that's what we're seeing in our data. And the other thing that I should point out is we're seeing higher satisfaction rates. So the enrollments that they are making, the formal enrollments in programs that channel companies are making with the vendors who matter to them most and who are aligned with their business outcomes, those relationships, they're telling us, are better. So those are more, they're more satisfied with their relationships. They're getting more out of them. But to your point, Dave, it doesn't mean that they won't offer a certain solution to a customer. It just means that they're not necessarily going to be cemented to that vendor in terms of the partner program relationship.
Interesting. Now, a reminder for watchers: you've got a question or comment, throw it in chat. We'll definitely address it. Now, you brought up distributors first, because that's where my head went as well. Do you have evidence that the distributor relationship is one of those key vendor relationships? And are you seeing that engagement level with vendors grow, with distributors grow, particularly as we kind of want to throw in the idea of marketplaces a little bit in there? Because as I've seen, a lot of the distributors are leaning into building their marketplace of solutions that they can offer.
Yeah, it's getting a little cloudy and strange. I just did a panel at my event at ChannelCon in August, and one of the panelists, Rob Ray, who's probably well known to everybody out there, was talking about, who works at Pax8, which is obviously a cloud marketplace for cloud distributor, and he was talking about how distributors no longer want to be, or at least Pax8 doesn't, and they want to be called the D word. They do want to be thought of as marketplaces, but marketplaces for the channel. Whereas the other big marketplaces we think about, the Googles, the AWSs, the Azures from Microsoft, they're more of the competitors to the channel in many ways. And we see that in our data. The number one competitor these days is to the channel is marketplaces. Distributors, I think, are being a little sly here. They're stealing the nomenclature. So they want to be called marketplaces because there's something kind of cool about a marketplace. It seems like we're an open bazaar. We're going to help you. We've got all the solutions here. And yet they're selling themselves as the marketplace to the channel. And I think that's what I'm talking about, where it kind of leads solution providers and MSPs to be able to deal with that marketplace that the distributor with the D on it is offering to them, and abstracting them from the vendors who happen to live in that marketplace and having to be enrolled in their programs. So I think what we're going to see, and this gets to a little bit about maybe what we want to talk about for trends for 2025 and beyond, is the role of distributor is really changing. And I know it's gone through many iterations, from just the pack and ship kind of iteration when it did hardware fulfillment only, to becoming much more involved in services and bundles and those kinds of solutions for their customers, to entering the cloud age where they're trying to help customers navigate that. To I think we're seeing another phase with distribution where they are going to be billing themselves as marketplaces, and they're going to be the go-to, not really for fulfillment only, but for helping MSPs figure out, and solution providers, ultimately those solutions that they're going to get to customers that are going to be multi-vendor.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm uncomfortable with their rebranding attempt,
Okay.
mostly because I just don't think it's necessary. I think it's trying to be like a cool kid where
Oh, I
that
think
doesn't.
you're right about that. I think it is them trying to be the cool kid for sure. Distributor is such a lame name now, it just sounds so old school, right?
Yeah, but embracing marketplace doesn't actually help the branding, the problem that they're trying to address. I think that there is a difference between when we talk about a marketplace like a Google one or an Amazon one or a Microsoft one. I think there is something different to that offering versus what a new distributor wants to be. But by the way, I don't think there's necessarily any shame in the line of business that they've come from.
No.
And I think that that we're trying to throw it all together to be the cool kid because we are an industry that loves the cool new trend more than anything. But I'm not necessarily sure we're adding any value there.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to move to a couple of things because something I spotted in your stack rank of business lines in the state of the channel report that really made me fascinated was the idea of data services. About 50% were highlighting. Now, I don't feel like enough people in our space are talking about data services. Can you elaborate a little bit about what is meant by that line item of what the channel is selling?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think data is something that is still being sorted out as what it means as a business line to many in the channel. So the fact that it was so high on that list does not necessarily mean it is a single thing. And it wasn't singularly defined in the study. So it's not as though we said data services in parentheses, it means X, Y, or Z. So check this box if you fit that model. So they could have interpreted data services in many different ways. So it could be that they're offering literally like old school database services and database management services. It could be that they're helping companies with their AI models and helping them figure out data in that regard. It could be that they're focusing a lot of their cybersecurity efforts around their data protection. And data protection could be the way that they go to market with cybersecurity. So I just want to set the table there that there was no singular definition in that. But the area of data, I think, is another one of these trends that, just like we used to say that, software development wasn't necessarily in the wheelhouse of most channel firms. They weren't doing coding. They weren't doing software development. We see that a little bit more now. Not necessarily that they're writing applications, but they do a lot of bridge work with coding, and they're helping companies, do integration in that and other things that require development skill. I think data fits into that bucket now as yet another frontier that the channel is going to need to tackle in some way because it touches on all areas of the tech stack. Really, there's data everywhere. And if you talk to customers and you're having business conversations with them, one of the most likely things, even the non-technical folks that you might be selling to are going to start talking to you about is how do we protect our customer data? We read a lot about breaches. We read a lot about this. How do we take care of data? Or they talk about AI and they talk about data in that regard. Like, I hear this thing about, AI is only as good as the data that it's fed in the first place. Well, how do we work a strategy around that? So I think there may be a little bit of aspiration in the channel firms that check that box as we're doing a lot of data services, and we see that with surveys. A lot of them can be aspirational in their answers, but I do believe that it is going to be a lot of what we see in terms of next frontier lines of business for companies that are savvy and smart. That's the direction they should head for sure.
Okay, well, we crossed the 13-minute mark without saying AI, and so which actually leads to where my head was at on this is because the reason I'm so interested in talking about data and looking for data services and people that are talking about it is my feeling and my perspective on what's going to happen here is that data governance is a prerequisite for getting AI right. That in order to do anything effectively, particularly with generative AI, that you don't want to give your entire data set to willy-nilly, and you're going to have to divide up and think about the way data is used within it. And while AI is really good with unstructured data, you can't just give it goo, right? You have to actually have it in some kind of format that is generally ready to be consumed. And so thus, time spent on data services is where that data governance is where that's going to grow, particularly over the next, say, 2 years. And if we dig into Microsoft's Copilot guidance, just as a specific tactical example, like they're outlining, hey, you've got to get your all data ready. So kind of what I wanted to get at is you've been looking at this for a little while. Is that trend growing? And where do you think, and how do you think of that premise, as someone who's analyzing where we're going to be going, say, next year or the year after?
Sure. AI has been interesting with respect to the channel. I'd say, the previous 1.5 to 2 years, it's been all about experimentation. We've asked on studies, where are you at with AI? What are you doing? And almost the large percentage of channel companies were not monetizing it in any way. They were working with it internally. They were maybe using it as part of their business just to see how things worked out. This year and into next year, the data is telling us that they are starting to figure out ways to monetize it. The interesting thing is when you ask, well, are you selling a product? Is there such a thing as an AI product? There really isn't. I mean, the way I think about AI is that it's more of an enabling technology that's going to be built in functionality, very strong and capable functionality, but also dangerous in the wrong hands, but built into other things. It's going to be part of a larger solution. So it's not, if you're thinking real old school with resellers, when they try to wrap their head around, well, is it something that I go to my customer and sell? No, it really isn't. So what we have been recommending, and what I've seen in some of the more cutting edge solution providers, is just what you're talking about, becoming an AI expert with respect to the various things that matter. And one of them is data. In fact, it's probably the biggest one, is building data models, having data governance. So understanding, how to use data and use it effectively and use it, in a safe manner. And what we're recommending is what you need to do with your customers, not necessarily go out there and push some sort of AI product on them, but you could build an entire practice around helping them come up with their AI strategy. It's really more of consulting than anything else. But I personally think we're going to see the greatest opportunity in the short term here for channel companies around AI consulting work. So they can go in and take a customer that hears a lot about AI, but really doesn't know anything about what it means for their company, and sit down with them and work out how to leverage AI for that customer's business, no matter what, particular use they use it for. But doing that sort of work with customers, and that requires extreme skill. You need to know what you're talking about. You need to understand how you can explain to customers about how to protect their data, how to use the right data, how to build a model that's effective and not junky AI results that you're going to get out of it, how to secure it. That's going to be another big area. So I think consulting, and you can put data services in that bucket, is if you choose to tackle it, probably your biggest opportunity with AI in the short term.
I want to get a little bit of your take on. So as I dug into it, you were looking at the fact in the data that the smallest channel firms are the most cautious about diving into AI sales, about 29% projected to do so. And then that compares to 46% of small firms, 52% of medium-sized firms, and 67% of large firms. I'm intrigued by the inverse that I spotted on this, and I wanted to get your kind of take and reaction to it. It felt to me like larger firms actually might have higher risk of danger of the hallucinations impacting their operations, or the fact that they would have much more need to get the data governance right, the data allocation, data security right, whereas smaller firms actually in a way have a lot less to lose, right? Because they may be able to lean in and get some productivity gains without necessarily having a huge suite of intellectual property they're trying to protect. What am I missing there in terms of thinking that? Because it feels like the smaller firms should be much more experimental right now, and they aren't.
Are we talking about smaller? We're talking about channel firms now, or are we talking about end customers?
In a way, let's focus on the channel firms first, and then we can go out to end customers, because it feels like the smaller firms might have more space. Channel firms would have more space for experimentation with a little less to lose.
I think you're right. I think the key hurdle here is skills and resources. So the smaller channel firms, when we're talking small channel firms, you're talking typically our average size channel firm is about $1 million in business, 10 or fewer employees. So which of those employees is going to be your AI experimenter, and who has the skills to do it? And if you don't have the skills on staff, with data or, whatever's needed to become an AI expert, do you have the money to go out and hire somebody? So I think it's less of the fact that channel firms haven't realized that maybe these smaller ones that, we're in a position where we can be more nimble. We could experiment with this stuff. We have less risk to take. And more of a case of, but they don't have the resources to do so, and they don't have the skills in-house. That would be my assessment. Again, don't have data to back that up, but that seems the most logical to me. Whereas a larger firm has the capacity. They will have people in-house already who may not have AI skills, but they've got skills that are adjacent to that already that easily apply themselves to the things you need to be able to do in order to take advantage of AI. So they can go ahead and start right out of the gate. Does that mean that they have less risk? No, it probably means that they're going to step over things, in the process. But I think for the smaller firms, it really comes down to just capacity and the ability to have like people on staff and the money to do it.
Gotcha. That makes some sense. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I want to get your take, particularly because you're a journalist at heart. Like your degree's there, your time is there, and now you spend a lot of time thinking about the application of data. And I was digging into a recent interview of yours, and you highlighted that you think there's a need to make sure that business owners have the ability to have a look at analyzing business trends data and understand it and comprehend it in a way that they can apply to their business, or they need an explainer in chief. Yeah. I thought that was a nice way of saying it. And by the way, it does ensure that both of us have jobs as explainer in chief. But tell me a little bit more about your thinking about that need to do analysis of business trends data.
Well, I don't want to be all analytics. I mean, sometimes I hate what analytics has done to sports, my beloved sports, where everything is about a data point and you make every move based on that. However, there's clearly some there when it comes to doing analysis. And I think that we have to find a balance in business between going completely on gut instinct, which a lot of small companies do. Let's face it, both small channel firms and their small customers. My dad ran a small business, and the number of times he did everything on gut instinct would, astonish you. And it was like he'd hit the jackpot. Sometimes it was a great decision, and then it was the best decision ever. And then other times, it was the worst decision ever. And he would have benefited back in the day from a little bit of data insight, my dad. However, so I can't say that, doing analytics is necessarily a bad thing. I think every business could benefit from being able to look at some numbers and some trends and be able to plot those out and see what they could do better, what their company isn't doing well now, and then making some forecasts and some projections for the future. Is every business going to be good at doing that, or have people on staff that understand how to read the data necessarily? No. That's where you need these explainer in chief. You can get an explainer in chief by hiring one, or you can use outside firms. This is another reason I think that, from a channel perspective, this is a great opportunity for you to become that explainer in chief. It sort of replaces the idea that we had of, being the virtual CIO. It doesn't fully replace it, but that to me is more tactical with dealing with your customers' infrastructure and their technology and their devices and all of that, and helping them with buying that sort of stuff. Whereas the explainer in chief on data needs to be sort of a business analyst and be able to bridge the worlds of technology and business and have a conversation with a company owner or a business owner that's in the vernacular that they understand and isn't in tech speak. So I don't know if that fully answered your question or if I went around in circles here, but I think, having data insights and the ability to explain those to your customers is going to be really important. And if you don't have that ability if you don't have the ability to do that with your own business, so a lot of MSPs need to be able to do that with their own business, it's very hard to translate that as something that you charge for customers.
Right, that's fair. All right, so let's have a little bit of fun, because I know you we normally work on the channel trends, and the state of the channel is published usually around February. So you work hard on it in January. But we're talking in October. I have a sense that there's a few things in your crystal ball that you're starting to think about as trends you're watching. Give me a little bit of the insight into the trends you're watching right now.
Yeah, we're getting started on, believe it or not, on State of the Channel. We're in the middle of working on our IT outlook, which will be specific trends for 2025. So a couple things that come to mind. I'll start with this one because I think this is a big one, and I've read a couple of articles about this, and we sort of talked about this a little bit, but I am wondering if there is a looming sense of tech fatigue. And what do I mean by that? Are businesses and business owners beginning to grow a little bit weary? And I'm not trying to undercut, we're all in business because of technology, but grow a little bit weary of throwing the next best tech solution at a problem or at something that they'd like to do that's not a problem necessarily, but some new innovation they want or something they want to do within their business that'll help it in a positive way. Have we reached a point with some companies out there, customers, who are saying, you know, what we're doing today with technology is good enough. I'm not going to take another risk and another chance and spend more money on additional technology this year. Let's settle in with what we've done thus far. And this runs sort of counter to all this excitement around AI. But again, I have read a number of articles where there's a lot more thought going into ROI and not necessarily backlash about technology, but more about like, hey, slow down. Can we see if this one works first before we throw it out and start over again? And I think tech fatigue, and I have not coined that term, but I think that's something to keep an eye on next year.
Oh, I'm intrigued by that one. And so we're gonna riff a little bit on that because it's fun. So I actually will tell you, I think cybersecurity is part of the problem. And so my reasoning goes this way. I am not a cybersecurity expert, but no matter what, how many times I have them on, even if I give them infinite money, they cannot promise an actual solution to the security problems.
No.
They'll play the risk management game. They will talk about minimization. They will talk about planning. They'll do all kinds of work. But even with infinite piles of gold showering them from the sky, they cannot actually solve the problem.
No.
And I get it. I'm not blaming them for that. But if you are a business owner and you've been hearing all the time how much you have to invest in security and how much you have to invest in that, and you throw money at the problem and things still happen and it doesn't get any better, you might at some point say, hey, this is a problem. And then if you layer on top of that the fact that everybody's cloud costs just continue to go up.
You do.
The SaaS vendors continue to increase pricing. There's pricing, there's pressure on there both for the SaaS companies to continue to grow revenue, and thus customers keep having to buy more. If you're a small or mid-sized business owner, your budget keeps going up, and you're not necessarily getting more results for your spend. And so I would posit that, I think tech fatigue is real, and some of it is self-inflicted. We're doing it to ourselves.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, cybersecurity, absolutely. It's an exhausting problem, right? It's it's like the unsolvable, Rubik's Cube for me. Some people can solve that thing, but I can't. And eventually you put it down and you say, I can't do this, and you give up. And I think there are levels of cybersecurity protection and risk that that business owners are weighing today, where they do get to a point where they're like, I think it's good enough. It's good enough. We'll take our chances that the asteroid is going to hit the Earth.
Right.
We'll take our chances. If that happens, oh well. But the 1 in whatever million chance that it's going to happen, I'm just going to take a risk there. Now, is that folly? Perhaps. I mean, we need to be as protective as we can. And I think that everyone in the channel, my data bears it out. In this report that we're talking about today, it's all about selling cybersecurity services. It's the most in demand by customers. But I think we reach a ceiling where people start to just get exhausted and they don't want to hear about yet another risk that they have to worry about, which means another check that they have to write. And I think you can extend that to some other things. It could happen with AI where, customers are like, listen, this stuff sounds really cool, but, do I really need it? How is this, you need to show me for real how I'm going to save money or make money by deploying some of the solutions that you're talking about right now. So again, I'm not here to throw water on the whole, the possibilities of technology in 2025. I think they're all still there. We're still going to have jobs and we're still going to be buying technology, but I do think there's a little bit of fatigue that's crept in.
So what's the uncovered trend, the trend that kind of has gone below the radar that has your sort of interest and analyst and journalist interest perked?
Oh God, that's a tough one, because I think the tech fatigue one is the one that I really thought about as uncovered.
It's good.
I know it is good. you know, it's an interesting time for MSPs. All right, I'll be a little, this is going to be, I think, a little wonky as an uncovered trend. And it's something that's been talked about for a while. But one of the things we're looking at moving ahead is what the MSP business model is going to look like as things like cybersecurity continue to be an issue. And are we going to see tighter controls with respect to regulation, formalized regulation, requirements for credentials and certifications, as you would see in other professions, have to take hold? And I know this is a subject that's been talked about quite a bit, but it seems to have a renaissance these days. Is, you know, do we need to have more oversight on MSPs and what their business actually is? Are there more checklists that they need to be able to check off, you know, that say that they have X, Y, and Z, which makes them a real MSP versus somebody who hangs out a shingle and says they're an MSP? It's one of the trends that we're going to talk about for 2025. And I'm curious how the industry responds to whether or not they think more control needs to be handed down whatever entity it is, if it's a government thing, whether it's an internal control, whether our peers are controlling ourselves. I'm not sure, but I think there's a little bit of a reckoning coming for the MSP business model with respect to accountability.
Oh, well, that's a great place to leave it, particularly because I'm going to allude, for those listeners that caught us last week when Howard Cohen joined me, he has some thoughts on regulation as well. Carolyn, this has been fascinating. Really appreciate you joining me today.
Of course, I loved it. I had so much fun. I'll come back anytime. And it was really good to talk to you, Dave.
Oh, it's great having you. We'll mix it up soon.
All right.
So Craig Petronella provides a fascinating insight into the current state of regulatory compliance, particularly around cybersecurity maturity model certification, or CMMC, for the defense industry. Craig discusses with me on an interview that's releasing this weekend how CMMC could become a unified compliance standard across various sectors. There's a critical need for more robust enforcement mechanisms and third-party audits to ensure businesses meet security requirements rather than, as he argues, just checking boxes. He also explores the role of software manufacturers in improving security by design and how AI compliance tools could help streamline the process for organizations. Here's a preview of that interview.
Problem, in my opinion, with a lot of these compliance regulatory frameworks is there's no centralized or no consistent framework for everyone to follow. So in my opinion, it caused a lot of confusion. So I think my prediction in the future is that CMMC will help with that and basically make it so that businesses have a consistent framework to follow. At least that's my hope.
It's interesting you bring it up that way, because my sort of follow-on and the way I've been thinking about this is like, look, right now, different industries do have specific compliance requirements. You know, is your thinking that the way this is going to go is CMMC will essentially just sort of take over everywhere and will be the single standard across all industries?
I do.
My Patreon supporters already have this video if you want to listen now. It'll drop on the weekend on YouTube and the podcast feed. If you're interested, I really do encourage you to listen. He's got some great thoughts on where the industry's going. Visit patreon.com/MSP Radio to get access. I want to thank Sales Builder, our Patreon sponsor, whose support makes this show possible. Focus on your IT sales workflow with the power of automation and visit them at salesbuilder.com. That's BUILDR.com. And vendors, you too can get your name mentioned on the live show. It's a simple monthly subscription. Visit patreon.com/MSP Radio to learn more. And listeners, you can support the show. Like, share, and follow on your favorite platforms. It's the number one thing you can do to help us grow. And support directly on Patreon with our Give What You Want model. You set what you think the content is worth, and you get access to videos early, plus early access to me and availability for consulting. If you have a question or are listening to the recording, send it in at question@mspradio.com. Thanks for joining me for the Business of Tech Lounge, and I will see you next time.